sales tax. But Wall Street pays nothing. And ironically, New York State has a Wall Street sales tax of sorts on the books. And this was paid until about 1978 or so, when the Wall Street people began with their blackmail and extortion. And they told the then governor, Hugh Carey, machine Democrat, they told him, look, stop with this tax or we're going to Jersey. And he caved, of course. So today, that tax is theoretically collected but immediately refunded, remitted to the Wall Street parasites and predators.
Unbelievable.
So isn't that amazing? And that would be $30 billion a year for the state of New York, of which New York City could count on getting a large amount. So this is what we're dealing with. And again, this is these are the realities. There's $30 billion, and I get people want to talk about Obama phones, or somebody got a few extra food stamps or something like this. That is for suckers, right? Wake up, people.
You mean that's chump change, really?
It's chump change. It's peanuts. Let's look at the grand larceny, right? Let's look at the huge looting operations. Let's get into the tens of billions, the hundreds of billions. And this, the Obama phone is nothing. It's insignificant. It's microscopic in this regard. Plus, I actually think Obama phone is a good thing, but that's another story. The point is that that's not politics. The golden rule of politics is you attack bankers. Bankers, and only bankers. Yeah. That's the only thing that makes sense to do. If you're attacking welfare victims, you're a sucker. You're a chump, because you're doing that in the service of some rich parasite, some rich predator who's got you doing it.
You said it best, politics. The politics is derived from two words, poly, which means many, and ticks, which are blood-sucking animals. So,
Joe, I'm afraid that the classical scholarship is not exactly. This is not exactly going to do it.
You were thinking I was going to hit you with some Latin. Oh no.
No, it's polis, right? Polis is the city, right? Mm-hmm. Polis, the city, right? Like megalopolis, right? The big city. So there we go, and the idea, of course, of the Greeks, which I share, I think it's correct, is that if you're only interested in your own affairs, then you're somehow missing out. And the Greeks were very, very blunt about this. If you were political, you took a part in the affairs of your city-state, in their case. But if you were only interested in your own affairs, you were an idiot. And the root of idiot himself. And that, unfortunately, is what we've had. And ironically, the libertarian view takes that essential attitude towards the world and really institutionalizes it, right? It really just it makes it theoretically practically inescapable. So there we are. The other thing, let me just mention another thing for
by all
terms
means,
of little news. I invite everybody to save the date. If you are anywhere near Washington, D.C., on September 24th, please save that evening date. Tuesday, September 24th, in Washington, D.C., we will have a suitable commemoration of the arrival of the Russian fleet in the harbor, the port of New York City, which is the number one turning point of the American Civil War, at least in terms of international affairs and maybe in terms of everything. People who are interested in history have probably followed the 150th anniversary, right? The sesquicentennial.
Right.
We've just had the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July. We then had the anniversary of the surrender of Vicksburg on July 4th. We've had the anniversary of the Battle of Fort Wagner, which was the first time that an entire black United States regiment went into action and acquitted themselves heroically, right? What you've seen in that movie, Glory, right, from some years back.
Yes.
But the big international question was that Britain and France were determined to destroy the Union. They were determined to attack Lincoln. And this was Lord John Russell and Lord Palmerston and William Gladstone in London and Napoleon III in Paris. Napoleon III was actually even more gung-ho than the British. The British realizing what the price to pay might have been. But the thing that deterred this overwhelmingly was the clear policy of the Russian Empire, of the Tsar, Alexander II. Alexander II made it clear that if Britain and France attacked the United States, came into the war on the side of the Confederates, Russia would attack both of them, England and France. And that could have taken the form of a Russian army in Paris. Remember, the Russians had been in Paris in 1815 at the end of Napoleon, right? The city was occupied by Russia, so they knew that was within the logistical capabilities. And it might have meant a Russian army going into India to take India away from the British. And there was very little the British could have done if the Russians had decided to send an army south into India. So that is the ball game. In other words, the entire Confederacy, in many ways, is a bet on getting the British and the French to intervene. Right? All the stuff about King Cotton,
right?
How if they're deprived of cotton, they're going to have to do something to revive the flow of cotton, so they'll have to break the Union blockade of the southern ports. And when you see somebody like Robert E. Lee going into Maryland in September of 1862, last year in effect, right, for the Battle of Antietam, or the second invasion now into Maryland and Pennsylvania in July of 1863, both of those were attempts to elicit, right, to evoke the British and the French to finally do something and intervene. And the principal factor preventing them, or a principal factor, is the fact that the Russian government had told them, if you meddle, you will have a war in Europe. You will have a war on your hands in Europe. And that would have certainly been a world war. The United States and Russia against Britain, France, Spain, possibly Austria on that side. There's good indication that Prussia, right, Germany, would have gravitated to the U.S. and Russian sides because of the hostility between Bismarck and Napoleon III. Right, Napoleon III was always worried that if he sent his army to fight, in the United States, he did send an army to Mexico, but not the big one that he kept. If the French garrisons on the Rhine were empty, then Prussia would come across. And there's also the fact that German savers, right, just normal German people, bought United States government bonds to help finance the war effort. So that would have been World War I, 50 or 60 years earlier, with a much better overall outcome, because it would have ended imperialism and colonialism in the world instead of prolonging it, which was the effect of World War I. So anyway, if you want to talk about all of that stuff, right, there's great figures. Cassius Clay, the U.S. ambassador, this is a guy from Kentucky. He's the nephew of Henry Clay, the great compromiser. That's Lincoln's man in St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. We've got William Seward, right? You've seen him in the Lincoln movie, I would expect. You've got Napoleon III. You've got these British oligarchs that I've said, Lord Palmerston, Lord John Russell, Henry Gladstone. You get a cameo appearance from Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband. And then you get Tsar Alexander II. And this is somebody quite formidable. This is the person who freed 23 million Russian serfs. He put an end to serfdom. And both Lincoln and Alexander II were killed. They were both assassinated by operations coming from British intelligence. In the case of Alexander II, it was anarchists, Russian anarchists run from London. And in the case of Lincoln, it was these Confederates run from London. So all of this. But The Russian fleet arrived in New York City September 24th, 1863. The Russian Pacific Squadron arrived in San Francisco on October 12th, 1863. And these fleets stayed in U.S. waters until the spring of the following year, the spring of 1864, when it became the conclusion that the foreign intervention crisis had pretty much passed, right, that it was not going to happen. Very interesting story, though, about San Francisco. At this time, the United States was too weak to have a two-ocean navy, so there was really only a one-ocean navy with a couple of other ships thrown in. So it was mainly the Atlantic. But you have San Francisco, of course. There's the Pacific. What are you going to do there? The question was that the defenses were maybe not that great in San Francisco. It was rumored at a certain point that Confederate raiders, right, the Alabama, the Sumter, some of the Shenandoah, were approaching to try to attack and burn San Francisco. And since the Russian admiral was there, he got his ships ready to defend San Francisco. Now, there's a moment from the hysteria of today, right? The anti-Russian hysteria, right? All this stuff about Snowden, this insignificant little fellow, and Syria. There's the serious issue, I think, is Syria. But imagine a Russian fleet is going to defend the United States port of San Francisco against the Confederate fleet. I think that puts it together. And you'll see, if you look at history, the United States was helped tremendously in the Revolutionary War by Catherine the Great of Russia. She was the principal person in the League of Armed Neutrality, which was not the French and the Dutch that joined the United States, but they were neutral but anti-British. And this was a great help. This was a great thing. In the War of 1812, it was the Russians in Paris, essentially, who said to the British, stop the war with the United States, right? Back off, you British. And the British had no choice. Then in the Civil War, and of course then in World War II, right? Without Russia, this would have been really a terrible thing. Like the Soviet Union played the key role. So if you look beneath the level of the demagogy and the hysterical campaigns, you'll see that there's a solid base of convergence between the United States and Russia. Anyway, this is a debt of honor, okay? So if you want to help pay the debt of honor, save the evening of Tuesday, September 24th, here in the Washington, D.C. area, and I'll put out the details when we've got them finalized, right? So this will be, his appropriate commemoration, evocation.
It sounds fabulous. I mean, that's great. I love things like that. Now, let me ask you this question. Why do you think Lincoln has been so vilified?
Oh, it's because of the so-called libertarian demagogy. In other words, what you have today is something I regard as truly monstrous. It's the merger of neo-Confederate thinking with the so-called libertarian stuff. Now, the libertarian business is not hard to diagnose. It's von Hayek and von Mises. Let's just limit ourselves to them, right? The so-called Austrian school. And this Austrian school was brought to the United States by David Rockefeller of the Rockefeller family.
Oh, my. Yes.
Yeah, that von Hayek was the tutor. He was the personal spoon feeder of David Rockefeller, who's very dumb, at the London School of Economics in the 1930s. I suspect that von Hayek probably wrote all of David Rockefeller's papers when he was at the London School, and if he had to do a dissertation or whatever it was. I bet von Hayek actually did all that, right? So he was the paid toady. Von Hayek was the paid toady of David Rockefeller. Von Hayek had gotten his start in Vienna right after World War I, writing articles to serve the interests of rent-gouging landlords who wanted to see the rent controls abolished so they could gouge everybody, gentrify them, and kick them out. Anyway, that's von Hayek. Then von Mises was a little bit more prestigious. So David Rockefeller brought von Mises to the United States with money, and he got him an endowed chair. He made sure that he was taken care of academically. And then you look at this meeting of the Mount Pelerin Society in Switzerland in 1947, 48, whenever it was. And here we have Milton Friedman. I think von Hayek got there. But anyway, you see what this is. It's the right wing of the CIA with William Buckley and the European feudal aristocracy with Otto von Habsburg and people like this. And then you get the Volcker Foundation. This is not Paul Adolf Volcker of the Federal Reserve. This is a different Volcker, very bad also, in some ways worse, less powerful, but ideologically worse. So they spread this bacillus of Austrianism, and of course is completely foreign to the United States, right? The United States is built on Hamilton, it's built on protectionism, dirigism, mercantilism, right?
Right.
The Republican Party was the high tariff party, and this was indispensable. I would cite just the clearest example, Henry Clay's American System, right? Because this is what Lincoln comes out of. Henry Clay's American System has three parts. A protective tariff against the British, so they can't strangle you with dumping. Secondly, a national bank. And this was the first Bank of the United States of Hamilton and the second Bank of the United States of Henry Clay. And then when that was destroyed, that was the Panic of 1837. That's the great wrecker, Andrew Jackson, who brings on the Panic of 1837. And we have the Panic of 1837. The United States the development is shut down, and the Confederates begin to gather their forces. Right, so it puts the U.S. on the course to sectionalism and civil war. So a protective tariff, a national bank, and infrastructure, or they called it the internal improvements paid for by the federal government, even if they're only in one state. We don't care. The port of New Orleans is only in one state. Who cares? It is an object of national interest.
Right.
I would even say, for the greater discomfort of Ron Paul, the port of Galveston is a national interest.
Of course it is.
Instead of hiding that funding as he did, right? Ron Paul would hide the earmark for Galveston in an appropriations bill in the dead of night. And then he'd come back and vote against it as the bill passed with Democrats and other votes. So he was of course a hypocrite, right? He wanted the money, but his ideology prevented him from saying that he wanted it. So we don't have that problem. We say, yes, we need the port of Galveston. It's all right. We need to have it, right? And it doesn't matter where you live. You need these things. So those three things: the high protective tariff, the national bank with a controlled currency, Hamilton, and then the infrastructure. And this is basically it today. This is the essence of the American system. That's what it was called. Friedrich List of Germany to the United States, Henry Carey, Lincoln, Hamilton. It leads into the populists. You look at the Omaha platform of 1890 with parity prices for farm goods. It's the same story, American system, and that leads into the New Deal. The New Deal is the fruition of many ideas that were out there in the populists in the 1890s, who were fighting against what? They were fighting against the gold standard, against the deflationary gold standard that was crushing them. And that's the main issue in most farm states from 1870 to 1910, is that their prices are going down and their debts are going up because of the gold standard. So
well, let me ask you this. Since we're on the gold standard,
we're not. Thank God. We're not.
Well, yeah, I know, but on these, let me clarify that. let me change this. Since we're on the subject of the gold standard,
right.
Why do you think right now there's such a push to move to a gold standard? And what do you? If not the gold standard, then what? Webster?
There is no push. That's ridiculous. There's no push to go to a gold standard. There's a bunch of kooks who are arguing, right? But these are marginal people in society, right? The average person. I mean, when you go campaign in New York or Chicago or some big city.
Oh, and say gold standard.
Go back to the gold. They'll say, "What are you from Mars? What is it?" Look, this is pure ideology.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid we have to get into psychology here. There is something called alienation and fetishism. And fetishism, of course, is you attribute magical qualities to some object, right? Totemism is a form of fetishism, right? You say, I'm going to make this wooden image of the great god, Baal or whatever it is, and I'm going to worship this because this to me is divine. No, sorry. Humanity has outgrown this stuff. But some people still have the fetishism of money, and above all, they have the fetishism of gold because they think that gold is the most typical form or the most pure form of money. And this, it's not healthy. In other words, it's a form of magical thinking. The value of a currency does not come from gold. You know the old story of the Midas curse, the curse of Midas?
Sure.
When he gets the ability, he can make everything into gold, and then he says, okay, it's time for lunch, and the food turns into gold, and then this won't help him. In other words, the value of money depends on what you can buy with it. You can command the production of an entire national economy with money, right? You want to buy something that the United States produces, you need to get dollars to buy it. Right? You want to buy farm products, right? I wish we had more that we produce, but we have biotech, we have Silicon Valley, we have the farm economy, we have some other things still. And if you want to buy those, you've got to buy some dollars. And unfortunately, the demand is not enough for these goods. But gold, you could have piles of gold, right? But then when it's time for lunch or it's time to get in the car, then you'll see that you need a full set economy with an agricultural component. So a lot of people, because of the world crisis, they become hysterical, I guess, and they what they want is money. In other words, people. This doctrine about gold, it appeals to people who have money and who believe they will continue to have money and who want to have more money. And that's the whole logic of this libertarian stuff. It's deflationary. In other words, the Ron Paul, Rand Paul program is to have an immediate deflationary crash. That's what they want. It's the same thing as Andrew Mellon back in the 1920s, right? Andrew Mellon was the guy who ran Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. Andrew Mellon, right, of the Mellon,
of the Mellon banking family.
Yeah, from Pittsburgh and places like this, right? Mm-hmm. So Andrew Mellon, a real predator, by the way, right, a tax evader, a real ripoff artist on a grand scale. His slogan was liquidate stocks, liquidate bonds, liquidate real estate, liquidate labor, liquidate the farmer, liquidate. And then when everything has crashed down, there'll be a recovery.
Right. Buy it up real cheap.
But what's the damage? Yeah, that appeals to him because he says, I've got money in the vault and I'm keeping it in the vault. So when everything crashes down, my money will be worth more. I can buy real estate I can't afford today. I can buy up, workers and experts and other things for really low prices. So it's essentially a form of greed. But, what happens to people who die in the process? My word on that is always the libertarians, Ron Paul would never really come out and say, let's have an immediate deflationary crash, right? Because that's pretty brutal. Peter Schiff, unbelievably, running for Senate in Connecticut, said unemployment needs to be more. Unemployment is not enough. What he means by that is if everybody's unemployed, then all unions collapse. You can bust all unions and you can drive down wages even more. All of this, of course, is suicidal, right? This is all aiming at a low-wage economy. You try to have a low-wage economy, the Chinese will eat you alive because you get lower than you will. They'll find somebody else who can. But just in terms of the gold and all the stuff, it's fetishism in the sense that the libertarian or the monetarist, and they're similar, right? The Austrian or the Chicago varieties of this disease, they believe that money is metaphysically real, that there's a rock bottom reality of economic life, and it's money. It's not money. It's production.
It's production.
It better be factories with skilled workers in them. It better be farms that can produce what you're going to need to eat. It better be a biotech industry that's going to help keep you alive, and so forth. So they believe this, and that is a form of alienation. In other words, when you look at economics, you'll see that economics is a matter of industrial engineering. It's a matter, for example, the money is a political fiction, and it should be a political fiction because this is not really the heart of the matter.
Right.
Money in our system, since we do not have a command economy, and it's better not to have a command economy, it's better to use money as a means of moving resources. In other words, because it allows everything to be done voluntarily and with the least.
Right, Webster. I mean, think about it. It's a lot easier to pay $10 than 2 cows, a chicken, and a horse. You know, I mean.
Yeah, well, I mean it that's also true, of course.
Right.
But I mean it in a slightly different way. The Soviets tried to have, they tried to plan everything down to the last bolt. No.
Oh, right.
But if our situation today in the United States is we have skilled, productive labor that's going to waste because they're unemployed. We have empty factories that are going to waste because they've been shut down and bankrupted.
Right.
Now, these are, in the real world, what you need to start production, right? Labor and capital goods in factories, right? The money is simply the political fiction that we use to put them together and get them going and allow them to order the inputs, right? To get these, the semi-finished commodities.
Sure.
Whatever goes into their product, they have to buy from somebody else. So you got to have money essentially to take that down the line. Right? This is the essence of our system, and that is why you could say today you could seize the Federal Reserve, and this is the heart of my program. Don't abolish the Federal Reserve. That's ridiculous. Then you're giving power to David Rockefeller once again because you'd have no regulator. You want to nationalize, deprivatize, seize, federalize, whatever you want to call it, the Federal Reserve, and then you tell them, look, you're going to put out, let's say, $5 trillion right now, and you're going to start buying bonds. Every state governor has got infrastructure projects that they build. So fine. So we're going to, instead of serving the banks, instead of quantitative easing 3 to buy these rotten mortgage-backed securities, in other words, derivatives, we're going to put out money, Ben, or whoever follows Ben. You're going to start opening up a credit stimulus window, and you're going to buy bonds from states or the New York Port Authority or entities like that. You're going to buy them. Those bonds will have a 0% coupon, no interest, and the maturity has got to be 100 years. And we're going to build things like the new New York to San, New York.
That new train. Yeah, what
fast rail, right? Fast rail, or better yet, maglev, right?
The guy, one of these, I can't remember their names. They developed a train that goes from Los Angeles to New York in 45 minutes. 45 minutes. That
is a highly interesting thing. That's in the vacuum underground.
It's called the Hyperloop. That's what it's called.
Right.
Yes.
It's a vacuum tube underground, and you can reach very high velocities. I'm all for it, but I would say that will take a little bit more time, and it'll also take a little bit more development for various reasons. But for sure, today we could do a maglev.
Oh, maglev, yeah.
And the maglev will get you from New York to Los Angeles in 4 or 5 hours. But that's city center to city center, including the stop in Chicago or wherever else it is along the way, right? That can also get going quite fast. And then there's everything to be built. There's the entire passenger system, the entire freight rail, the entire commuter rail, the entire water systems. We have locks on the Ohio and Tennessee River where if they shut down, whole areas of production will also shut down because you're going to get the coal out of West Virginia on certain canals.
Yeah.
There used to be 3 locks and now there's only 1, and if that one breaks down, and so on and so on and so on. So there's the American Society of Civil Engineers does the yearly or almost yearly report card. And their finding was that if you want to go from a D plus to a C in your infrastructure, you'd have to spend $3.6 trillion. So that would be the first thing to do. Say, okay, first tranche is we're going to buy $3.6 trillion worth of bonds. Now, compare this. If you lend money to a zombie bank, what do you get? You get the promise from Lloyd Blankfein or Jamie Dimon that they'll pay you sometime. But those are zombie banks. Those are bankrupt entities. Those exist as wards of the U.S. federal government. What are we kidding? They would be long gone if it weren't for the TARP and for the $27 trillion line of credit that they got from the Fed. Whereas if you get the governor of Mississippi, right, wants to build some rail lines or something like this, what you get out of that is a high quality asset, which is a bond that's got a real physical object behind it. In other words, it's not just some promise from some Wall Street bandit, but an actual, piece of infrastructure.
Right.
Which is with some
a
modest
tangible asset, right?
Tangible asset, some kind of modest user fee, or better yet, just out of the general revenue, because you can pay for this at 1% a year. There is no interest. You pay for it at 1% a year, and as the economic development goes on, that 1% gets to weigh on you less and less and less as it goes along. It's called the Century Bond, by the way, and the smart people at Caltech, right? Great institution, right? One of the most prestigious in the world. California Institute of Technology, Caltech, they called attention to century bonds a year or two ago by issuing their own century bonds. They said, this is a great time to issue century bonds.
Wow.
It is. At 0%, though. Get that price down as far as you can. And then, of course, after that, the credit stimulus window at the Fed could go on issuing credit for production, right? For farmers, for auto, for Silicon Valley, for biotech, for other branches that will emerge, right? If we want to rebuild Detroit, which we have to do, there's a whole city there that's calling out for new factories, new companies, and at 0% credit over very long maturities, you can do all that.
And that's all well and good, Webster. But now, in parallel to that, would you not have to repeal or come out of some of these free trade agreements and treaties?
Yeah, and I've been for that for a long time. In other words, if you look at my program, it's in my book, Surviving the Cataclysm, Your Guide to the Worst Financial Crisis in World History, first edition or second edition, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. I'm for I call it, in the old days it would have been called a revenue tariff, but it's a protective tariff, really. Today, I would say start with 15% and then see what happens, right? But yes, a 15% protective tariff. The idea being, today the vulture capitalist says, "Oh, I'm not going to keep my factory in Pennsylvania or Illinois or whatever it is. I'm going to get to Thailand for coolie, runaway shop. I'm going to get coolie wages from them." Fine, you could say, look, that's fine, but you're not going to be able to re-import your product. You're going to have to pay that 15%. So factor that in. And again, if the 15% is not enough, it can be raised. But what we absolutely need to do is to break with this period of several decades of severe ideological confusion with this free trade stuff, right? NAFTA and so forth, where this has become dominant. The Obama administration is right now proposing a new free trade agreement with the European Union. The answer has to be no. Not only no to that one, no to any of them, right? They just approved one with South Korea. No. The results are always terrible. This was the one point that Perot had, was the giant sucking sound. And there is a giant sucking sound, right? And ultimately, I would say the reason that the Republicans won the Congress in 1994 was not stupid Newt Gingrich and his stupid contract on America.
Yeah.
It was Al Gore trying to tell Perot that free trade was great, and people were horrified. And that little giant sucking sound line from Perot, which in spite of the bankruptcy of Perot, pretty much on everything else. He was right about that. So you got to put an end to the giant sucking sound. What you want to do is world trade should be devoted to high-quality capital goods. The idea that you have to import beer from Australia, I cannot see it, right? Or, low-quality consumer goods from Asia. This is not what you should do with world trade. You should be dealing in tremendously advanced modern capital goods, things like locomotives, electrical generators, scientific equipment. That's what you want to sell, because there you can, it's the price of transportation is trivial compared to the value of the good, right? You want to basically trade things that are fairly expensive,
right?
Not cheap stuff. So you can have an economic recovery any way you want it, but of course that's not what the libertarians want. You can sum it up in the following way: there are generally speaking, four possible economic policies. Okay, one of them I think we've just gone through. The libertarian Austrian one, which is have an immediate deflationary crash, hope for the best, and then there'll be a recovery. Right? Too bad if you died. Let me also just, since we're back on this,
sure.
The libertarians want to tell you that the crash of 1920 is their dream program. And it's what they want for America, right? They want to go back to the great crash of 1920. Which was very severe and led to very high unemployment. But they say, oh, look, it ended very quickly. Well, my dear libertarian friends, that crash was worldwide, right? That was not just the United States. That was the U.S., the British, and continental Europe. And one of the byproducts and spin-offs of that charming crash of 1920 that they're always telling us was such a good thing was a little matter of Mussolini's March on Rome, October 1922. In other words, out of that crash came fascism. And this is the problem with what the libertarians say. The libertarians always say, oh, no, we're not fascists. We're not Nazis. Yeah, but wait a minute. Wherever the libertarian policies are fully implemented, somehow fascism comes soon after.
Right.
And again, that's a good example.
And it almost came here, the coup against FDR, right after the Great Depression, and Smedley Butler came into the rescue.
Yes. Now, since I was going to take this a slightly different direction, maybe we can get back to those four things. But
yes,
now, however, since you bring this up, this is not just one coup, okay?
Right.
This is more than one, and it ends with his assassination. And I hope to be able to tell this story before too long. Now, here's the way it goes. I have to mention a French woman historian,
sure.
Annie Lacroix. It's LACROIX-RIZ. And what she writes about is the French fascist secret societies, the Cagoule and the Synarchs, okay? And what she argues is that the French defeat in 1940, June 1940, the collapse of France, this was deliberately produced by generals and politicians who were part of the Cagoule, the hooded group, as it called, and the Synarchy, right? That they wanted Hitler. They wanted the Nazis to come in so they could drive down wages, break unions, and do the other things that they couldn't do any other way. Now, the operation that you're talking about, what Smedley Butler revealed to the Dickstein Committee, if you recall, in the middle of that, the representative of the House of J.P. Morgan, who's trying to get Smedley Butler to become the man on horseback, he said he has been to France and he has studied what's going on there. And he studied the Colonel de la Roque, R-O-C-Q-U-E or R-O-Q-U-E, and his group, the Fiery Cross, La Croix de Feu. So these are connected, okay? Mm-hmm. In the 1930s, these same families that are preaching libertarianism or just Wall Street to us today, right? Monetarism or whatever it is. They were involved in pro-fascist, pro-Nazi organizing. And this is a big secret of American history. The whole McCarthy era is an attempt to, how can we say, overcompensate, right? To start blaming people. You were a friend of Stalin, you were a friend of the Soviets. Whereas the whole Republican Party was at various times extremely sympathetic to Mussolini, and quite a few of them sympathetic to Hitler. But let's just go through it. In the United States, here's what you have vis-a-vis Roosevelt. Before he became president, you have an assassination attempt. That is in Miami. It is in about a month before the inauguration. President-elect Roosevelt is riding with Mayor Chernak of Chicago in an open car. An Italian anarchist, typical British plant, comes forward, starts shooting, kills the mayor of Chicago, Chernak. Roosevelt is unharmed. Okay? So there's an assassination attempt. That's number one. The second one is the one that you've mentioned. It's the attempt to have a Mussolini March on Rome, March on Washington.
Right.
This is about 1934, when they realize what Roosevelt represents, this Morgan, right? It's not the business coup, it's a Wall Street coup, and it's the House of Morgan coup. J.P. Morgan, as in J.P. Morgan Chase that you have today. So that's when they try to recruit General MacArthur, who says no. Smedley Butler not only says no, but then it starts talking about it, right? So that was the second one, okay? And that's also a failure.
And that was the one where they tried to use the bonus army.
The bonus army,
right?
Because the bonus army, of course, had already marched under Hoover, right? They had already come to Washington before that. Now, there's a third. There's one assassination attempt. We've just done one coup attempt. Then there's a second coup attempt. The second coup attempt is around 1937. There's a guy. He's a member of General Pershing's staff from Europe, and this guy's name is Mosley. Van Horn Mosley is a top U.S. Army officer with fascist sympathies, and he proposes to lead a group of white Russians, that is to say, anti-communist emigres, having left Russia, hating Stalin, to lead them. It's this interesting aspect. If we think of the years, say, from about 1960 until even now,
yeah,
the desperados that the CIA turns to for their operations are often anti-Castro Cubans. Right? You see that in Iran-Contra. You see it in all sorts of things. I think you see it in 9/11 when you get right down to it. But the anti-Castro Cubans are all over the place, right? Watergate, Iran-Contra. In those days, it was not so much Cubans; it was Russians. It was Russian nobility who had fled from Russia. So they're used. So that's 1937. General Van Horn Mosley proposes to attack the White House, leading a battalion of white Russians, and seize control of the government.
Oh my!
Then there's a third. This is 1941 to 1942. This is a guy called von Siatsky. This is an official Russian Nazi. This is an organization sponsored by the Japanese in the Far East to attack Stalin, right? To say we're the Russian Nazis and we want to kick out Stalin, the communist, because he's bad for Russia. Von Siatsky had come to the United States and married a very rich heiress, so he had this house in Connecticut, which was an armory, and he had a suitable group of Nazi fanatics, and they were going to try to pull some kind of a violent action. This was on the eve of Pearl Harbor and soon after Pearl Harbor. This is where the Dodd family breaks into history. In other words, the father of Senator Dodd, right? We've just seen
Yep.
Senator Chris Dodd, a bum, okay?
Yes.
Chris Dodd, a bum, as we see in Dodd-Frank. His father, Thomas Dodd, was not that bad, certainly much better than his son. And Thomas Dodd became famous as the district attorney who prosecuted von Siatsky and his Russian fascist cohort. So you have one coup is the Morgan coup with, they're trying to get Smedley Butler, but he says no, 33-34. 36-37 is the Van Horn-Mosley coup with white Russians, and then we have 41-42. Now, at the end of it all with Roosevelt is the poisoning, and this is the big story of the U.S. in the 20th century.
Okay.
That Roosevelt was assassinated. Roosevelt was poisoned.
So he didn't blow his brains out in
No. All disinformation, all absolutely ridiculous. And it takes the obvious problem posed is that when Roosevelt died, there was in the room a white Russian woman painter and a white Russian photographer working with her. And this is Madame Shumatov. And here's the funny thing, or the outrageous thing, is that we're at Warm Springs, Georgia, right? It's April 1945.
Yeah.
Roosevelt has come back from Yalta. He's exhausted, but he's improving. I would also point, if you look at Yalta, on the way home from Yalta, Roosevelt's principal military aide, Pa Watson, died on the trip. Just died, right, on the way.
Oh, and how coincidental?
It looks like a poisoning that didn't quite hit the right.
But now, how frail was?
And Harry Hopkins,
yeah.
His right-hand man, was so sick that he had to stop the trip in France or England on the way back from Yalta because he couldn't go any further, not even in the comfort of a heavy cruiser. So this woman Shumatov, you look at her family.
Yeah.
The family is connected through this extended family network to. And I'll have to save the details for the actual book, but the assassination of Rasputin that family is involved, right? Rasputin was assassinated by the British and the French because they considered him to be pro-German.
Right.
And we have the Roosevelt assassination, and finally we even have the Moro assassination, M-O-R-O, right? The former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro in 1978. So here's the thing with Madame Shumatov. She was allowed to bring her paint box into the presence of Roosevelt. So she's got these paints, right? So the stories are very explicit that she would often dip her brush into a wine glass and use that to mix the paint. So you can imagine she's got
mean arsenic paint?
Well, yeah, she's got red, white, green, blue. Then she's got arsenic, cyanide, and strychnine. And Roosevelt looks away, and she dips her brush into a glass, maybe his glass, because he was always smoking and drinking. There's nothing to be said about this, right? So, and this was widely suspected at the time. And of course, just to wrap this part up, when Roosevelt's son, Elliot Roosevelt, visited Marshal Stalin, Generalissimo Stalin, in the Kremlin in 1946, Stalin said to him, "Your father was murdered, he was assassinated, he was poisoned by the Churchill gang. Sir Winston Churchill killed your father." And Stalin had thought that from the very beginning, right? As soon as Roosevelt died, they sent Averell Harriman to the, Averell Harriman, of course, part of the Wall Street.
Oh, geez, yeah, the Bush, and the big Bush ties, yes.
Well, he's the head of that company, right?
Yes.
That's the owner of what Prescott Bush worked for.
Exactly.
Tremendous Nazi connections of his own. So he is sent to the Kremlin. He's the U.S. ambassador in Moscow. He's sent to the Kremlin to tell Stalin that Roosevelt has died. The first thing Stalin says to him is, "I believe the president was poisoned. I want my ambassador Gromyko to see the body. I want to inspect the body. My man Gromyko knows the symptoms of poisoning. We want to see the body." And he was told no. The U.S. told him no. It's usually blamed on Eleanor Roosevelt, but I am not sure that Eleanor Roosevelt is really responsible. I think it's more like people who were involved in the in the killing. Anyway.
Well, that marriage had soured, though. I mean, and I can understand where that would come from.
It's irrelevant, though. It's irrelevant. Why would she? Why would she love the Soviets? Right? There's no point. There's no point. The point is that this introduced this element of doubt, right? That the United States had been taken over by an anti-Soviet group that hated Roosevelt, killed Roosevelt, and put in this contemptible little Ku Klux Klan figure, Harry S. Truman. And they loved Truman, right? The establishment today loves Truman because he is the model of the puppet president. Well-behaved, pliable, do anything you want, take orders immediately, and never talk about it. Right? So he's the model of the puppet president. So we go from Roosevelt, the most independent president we've ever had, the person who exercised the powers of the presidency more than anybody, at least in the 20th century, to the most degraded. So anyway, that's the story. And of course, our libertarian friends all say, "Oh no, Roosevelt was a tool of Wall Street." Well, that is simply a lie. That is absolute garbage, right? That argue with the history that I've just outlined.
The only thing I would say to is why then the push to expand the Supreme Court when they were
absolutely Look at the Supreme Court today. You have got the rats cabal, rats.
They are all rats, right?
So if you get to this point.
So was he trying to muddy the water? I guess you could say.
No,
I mean,
they're trying to change the majority. In other words, you have fascist judges. You're going into World War II. You've got to do something about these fascist judges. You've got to fight them somehow. I'm 100% in favor of attacking the Supreme Court. I would do it today. Look at this. The Supreme Court is sacred? How are they sacred?
They're not sacred. That was one of John Adams' biggest mistakes, was the whole idea of lifetime appointments. Because of the, we have to take politics out of it. No, there's still politics in it today. That's the problem.
It's all political. That's obviously, I think you're not being fair. I want to stand up for John Adams, but I don't have time. So I would say, let's not look so far afield. Let's just look at the here and now and the practical issues.
Right.
The plan to expand the Supreme Court under Roosevelt was fine with me. And today, I would recommend impeach Scalia, impeach one of them, and that would put the fear of God in the other ones. And it would take the most egregious fascist and impeach him. Scalia says, you don't have the right to vote. Scalia's dissent on the Obamacare is a monstrosity. I don't know what rock that guy crawled out from under, but the idea that you have somebody like Scalia in the Supreme Court in this day and age, right, in the 21st century, this is absolute monstrosity. So I would say my approach would be pick the most villainous and the most vulnerable and impeach him, because they can be impeached, right? That would be my solution. But if that's not going to work, then nominate some new ones. Certainly.
Wow, that was the only thing that really, got me. That and the fact that.
Why? On the basis of what?
Well, no. Now I'm seeing it a little differently now, in that if it is, as you say, and it is today. I mean, it's fascist in nature. It's what it is. Then you would seek to try and limit the power of their voices by adding more. You want to add
again. I would recommend impeach one of them, and the other ones will start behaving better. Look, let's just take this voting rights question, right?
Sure.
The rollback of the pre-clearance on these voting changes, and now we have North Carolina. I have warned for a long time, the project of the Wall Street group, which is, it's going to have to be realized through the Republican Party, is before the Republican Party collapses demographically, which it is doing, the Republican Party would like to create a permanent austerity dictatorship under the auspices of the Republican Party. And it's much harder to do it through the Democratic Party because of the groups that are represented. They probably learned that through Carter. They haven't tried it since then. But this is what was underneath the Romney candidacy. The Romney candidacy, backed by Petraeus, Allen, Admiral Stavridis, and it was all those generals who got fired all generals who organized Benghazi, like General Ham and General Petraeus of the CIA, the generals who organized Benghazi as an attempted October surprise to get Obama out and above all get Romney in, they were part of this attempted permanent austerity dictatorship. And one of the keys to it is if you can control the Supreme Court, and right now we have this essentially a fascist majority in the Supreme Court, right? The rats, Roberts, Alito, Thomas, Scalia, plus Kennedy, right? And that's usually what's working. You can then do what they've just done, which is to essentially deny a lot of people the power to vote. You want to have a dictatorship. The Republican Party can't cut the mustard because they're so hated, right? They're so, they're practically white supremacists. They're open reactionaries. They're benighted. They hate women. They hate Latinos. They hate the city. They hate the Northeast. They're just a bunch of hate mongers. But you could rule through that party if you could limit the franchise. In other words, if you could deny most people the power to vote, you could still have a permanent dictatorship with the Republican Party, keeping the fiction of elections. The other thing you'd have to do is to pass union-busting legislation. And again, Ron Paul and Rand Paul are out there for a nationwide right-to-work union-busting law, right? So you'd have no ability to vote, no ability to have a mass organization to fight back. And then you could just, if you've got the House is gerrymandered, if you can control the presidency and the Senate by denying lots of people the right to vote, there's your permanent austerity dictatorship. And that's what people ought to fight. And you can see that creeping towards you when Detroit is taken over by a dictator, because that's what it is. I call that the little Hitler law, right? The guy who's running Detroit, he's a dictator. There's no mayor, there's no city council, there's no nothing. They don't have the right to vote locally, right? Benton Harbor, Michigan, same story, right? Local dictator. They do whatever the hell they want. So the creeping fascism is no votes, no unions, and then more and more cities are taken over. Right?
I'm not a big fan of the voter ID law, and I'll tell you why. It may be a little bit different from you, but in the sense that it shouldn't be required, period, end of story, that you have to show your ID to prove yourself like that. Personally, I don't like it, because what that does is it also ushers in the excuse of a need for a federal ID card, which I am not a big fan of. I don't think that.
Why do we need this stuff, right?
You don't need it.
Necessary.
You don't.
There is no vote. There is no voter fraud. Here's what there is. There's vote fraud.
There's vote fraud.
The vote fraud is done using
That's on the counting side. Yeah.
That's done by Karl Rove with tens of millions of dollars, and various interfering with the this news election service. So whatever it's called. In other words, in the 2000, 2004, and now 2012 elections.
Yeah, the Diebold machines and everything.
Yeah, exactly. They were Secretary of Defense Hagel starts off with Sequoia voting machines. That's how he got into the Senate, by owning the voting machine company. Yeah, that's vote fraud. It's massive. It's top down. It's done by people with big money. Voter fraud, that I go and impersonate Joe Blow I can. Yeah. It's ridiculous, right? And it doesn't add up to anything. It doesn't happen. There just is no proof. So anybody who comes with that crap is trying to erect a permanent austerity dictatorship. My hope is, based on what we've seen in the last election, that people never want something so much as when they hear that somebody else is going to take it away from them. And my perspective for the United States is this, Joe. The destruction of the Republican Party in place. Destroy it. It's hopeless. It's a lunatic asylum of benighted medieval obscurantist figures, racists, haters, I don't know what. The Democratic Party, also unviable. Split it into two parts. Have the Wall Street Democrats. The Wall Street Democrats are Obama and Schumer and Durbin. But then you've also got something that's different. You can call it the other Democrats, maybe. Or they might qualify as populist Democrats or something along those lines. You'd have Elizabeth Warren. You'd have Sherrod Brown of Ohio. You'd have Congressman DeFazio. You'd have Marcy Kaptur. You'd have various, people who are they're not so much in love with Wall Street.
They're more of a blue collar-esque type of Democrat.
I hope there are still some of those. Yeah. I mean that stuff it's tended to atrophy quite a bit. But that's sort of the idea. That Sherrod Brown will tell you that he's the blue collar. Oh, Mikulski here in Maryland claims to be the only working class member of the Senate. I don't know.
But
the idea is Republicans go away or become a party for racists.
Let's just call them the Whigs from here on out.
I think this name has seen its time, right?
Yeah.
The Republicans disappear because Henry Clay was a Whig, right? Whig was a good thing. Lincoln was a Whig, but forget that. The Republicans disappear. The Democrats, however, have to split in because with this, the Wall Street wing of the Democratic Party, which is the majority of elected officials are from the Wall Street wing. That's got to end. So break that apart. The unions will have to choose where they go. Other organizations will have to choose. And that would get you into the 21st century as distinct from this Republican stuff, right? With the, all the crazy. I don't even want to go into it because some of their legislation is just obscene.
I think it totally. I mean, I truly believe that that both parties have really done very, very, very big damage, a lot of damage to this country. I'm not a proponent of the Democrats or the Republicans.
No, and neither am I, as you've just heard.
Right.
I want one of them to be destroyed and the other one to split into two parts. So that basically I'm talking about getting rid of both of them in their current form. Absolutely. But, and that's the news, right? In New York, if all goes well, the signatures are going to be submitted on Tuesday, and you're going to have the Tax Wall Street Party on the ballot in the city of New York. Isn't that amazing? Out of the belly of the beast, right? In the city which has been crushed by Bloomberg of Wall Street for 12 years, there's still enough fight left. I hope to have the Tax Wall Street Party get on the November ballot. Right? Randy Credico is running in the Democratic primary on September 10th against this menagerie, right? So he's got the Wall Street sales tax as his principal point. In other words, he's got a program of very interesting reforms, but they're all paid for by collecting a tax on Wall Street.
And that's fantastic. I got my co-host John King. Just popped in. He's going to join me for the next couple hours as well as.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to drift off. But
no, that's okay. But I wanted John to share with you real quick, Webster, his union experience. Now he comes from Western Pennsylvania. Steel industry's been decimated there, and wages stagnant, horribly, horribly stagnant. John King, how you doing, buddy?
Going fine. Just put in a little bit of overtime for today. They hire in at where I work. They hire in at $9.25 an hour. That's grunt wages doing grunt work, and the highest paid guy there is making about $18 an hour, and that's pretty good money around here. Over in the machine shop side, $65,000 is a darn good wage, where the average worker is pulling in anywhere from 19 to 22.
Yeah, and the thing that I'm finding here, and I don't know, Webster, what the unions seem to be losing some of their clout.
Look, let's just establish the baseline. The American trade union movement is a wreck. It has been in full retreat, in full rout since about 1970, and every decade that's gone by is worse than the one before. There are tremendous distortions, right? There are crimes committed by union leaders, which are undoubted. But you have to understand that this all takes place in an atmosphere of overwhelming weakness and despair and retreat. In other words, these organizations, we used to have 25% of workers were unionized in the private sector, and now it's down to 7% or something microscopic like this. And under those conditions, the kinds of tactics that they've tended to rely on to survive are, deplorable. They're the kind of thing that turn people off. And I'd be the first one to say that. But you got to imagine, what would this look like if they were on the offensive? And remember, unless you can remember, my recollection is the last offensive strike that I took part in, was the General Electric strike of 1968. Okay, that was it. That was the last hurrah, and ever since then, it's all downhill, right? So of course.
Wow, that's
But look, there's another side to the coin. You look at Occupy, okay? Occupy Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Occupy Wall Street didn't really get anywhere, but at least it got people's attention, and a lot of people now know that Wall Street is the enemy. Okay, how did Occupy take off? Occupy did not take off thanks to the street people and the anarchists and a bunch, of others, idle, curious, disoriented youth. That was not enough to even fill that park. The Occupy took off when the communications workers of America, that is the telephone workers, when they showed up, when the United Federation of Teachers showed up, when the transport workers union, right, the subway workers and bus workers, when they showed up. In other words, when some still intact unions told their members, go to Occupy this afternoon and we'll help these anarchist kids and others, right? We'll do something for them. And that is what made Occupy big. Right? That's when they went from 3,000, 5,000 to 50,000 in one afternoon. So remember, whatever you think of these unions, they are the only possible basis for mass resistance against a dictatorship, against a coup. We've been on the verge of a coup here. Most people don't know it, but Petraeus and company think in terms of a military coup. And that's what that Benghazi was, right? Get Romney in there, have Petraeus become Secretary of State or something, have him run the government. Romney would be the ceremonial president. Petraeus would have the power, uniting the CIA and the Pentagon, together with whatever else he had. You've been on the verge of a coup quite a while, right? 9/11 was certainly that, right?
Yes.
So we've been, navigating the edge of a coup. We've been lurching along the edge of a coup for quite a while. And we just had another attempt to coup. John Forbes Kerry, Skull and Bones, on the 12th of June. He tried to go into a meeting of the National Security Council and say, let's bomb Syria right now, this minute. Give the order. Syria, bomb Syria. Without telling Obama. Obama is lucky if he's told after the fact. This would have been something like Al Gore, right? Al Gore in March of 1999. Al Gore gave the order to bomb Syria, not Clinton. Clinton wasn't told until later, right? And then he had to go along with it. Similarly, Kissinger, well documented, October 1973, right? Gives the order, go to top nuclear alert.
Right.
Nixon asleep, not told. In other words, you can have a palace coup. You can have a coup from inside the White House apparatus by somebody like Kissinger or this bum Kerry that we have now. So you're always on the verge of a coup. And you got to have some organizations that can fill the square, right, that can fill the streets with people and get others out. And it's no coincidence that these characters like Ron Paul and Rand Paul, they want to destroy all unions. They're very explicit about that. And I wonder, what libertarianism is that? If I want to have free association and join a union, who are you to tell me otherwise?
Well, you can't. It's hypocritical. But even more so, it's utopian because you're under the assumption that you can just do away with this stuff and then life is going to go on and everybody's going to be happy and people are going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. There are people that want to loot and plunder you constantly. Right. If it's not the bankers, if they go away, it's going to be somebody else. Somebody's going to step into their place, Webster. And I mean,
but the libertarians are here to tell you that you can't be free unless you're atomized, right? The only way you can really be free is if it's you alone facing the giant corporation or the giant government, right?
The David and Goliath, yes.
that's just, it's unrealistic. Anyway,
you're absolutely right. But hey, I appreciate you spending now an hour and 15 minutes with me. Good grief! I mean, this was fantastic, and I don't want to keep you because I know you're very busy. But folks, I mean, it's great programming like this with Webster Tarpley and many others. We got Aaron Dykes as well, who also a big admirer of you, Webster, and he's going to try and come on tonight and join us for a conversation. And I'll tell you, it's very, very heartwarming to have people like you here fighting for truth and for justice the way that it should be fought for. So thank you for coming on and supporting us today.
Good luck, and I urge everybody to support Unbound Radio, of course.
Yes, thank you so much.
Sales tax. But Wall Street pays nothing. And ironically, New York State has a Wall Street sales tax of sorts on the books. And this was paid until about 1978 or so, when the Wall Street people began with their blackmail and extortion. And they told the then governor, Hugh Carey, machine Democrat, they told him, look, stop with this tax or we're going to Jersey. And he caved, of course. So today, that tax is theoretically collected but immediately remitted to the Wall Street parasites and predators.
Unbelievable.
So isn't that amazing? And that would be $30 billion a year for the state of New York, of which New York City could count on getting a large amount. So this is what we're dealing with. And again, this is. These are the realities. There's $30 billion. And I get, people want to talk about, Obama phones or, somebody got a few extra food stamps or something like this. That is for suckers, right? Wake up, people.
You mean that's chump change, really?
It's chump change. It's peanuts. Let's look at the grand larceny, right? Let's look at the huge looting operations. Let's get into the tens of billions, the hundreds of billions. And this, the Obama phone is nothing. It's insignificant. It's microscopic in this regard. Plus, I actually think Obama phone is a good thing, but that's another story. The point is that that's not politics. The golden rule of politics is you attack bankers. Bankers, and only bankers. Yeah. That's the only thing that makes sense to do. If you're attacking welfare victims, you're a sucker. You're a chump because you're doing that in the service of some rich parasite, some rich predator who's got you doing it.
You said it best. Politics. The politics is derived from two words: poly, which means many, and ticks, which are blood-sucking animals.
Joe, I'm afraid that the classical scholarship is not exactly. This is not exactly going to do it.
You were thinking I was going to hit you with some Latin. Oh no.
No, it's polis, right? Polis is the city, right? Mm-hmm. Polis, the city, right? Like megalopolis, right? The big city. So there we go, and the idea, of course, of the Greeks, which I share, I think it's correct, is that if you're only interested in your own affairs, then you're somehow missing out. And the Greeks were very, very blunt about this. If you were political, you took a part in the affairs of your city-state, in their case. But if you were only interested in your own affairs, you were an idiot. And the root of idiot himself. And that, unfortunately, is what we've had. And ironically, the libertarian view takes that essential attitude towards the world and really institutionalizes it, right? It really just it makes it theoretically practically inescapable. So there we are. The other thing, let me just mention another thing for
by all
terms
means.
Of little news. I invite everybody to save the date. If you are anywhere near Washington, D.C., on September 24th, please save that evening date. Tuesday, September 24th, in Washington, D.C., we will have a suitable commemoration of the arrival of the Russian fleet in the harbor, the port of New York City, which is the number one turning point of the American Civil War, at least in terms of international affairs and maybe in terms of everything. People who are interested in history have probably followed the 150th anniversary, right? The sesquicentennial.
Right.
We've just had are going to have to do something to revive the flow of cotton, so they'll have to break the Union blockade of the southern ports. And when you see somebody like Robert E. Lee going into Maryland in September of 1862, last year in effect, right, for the Battle of Antietam, or the second invasion now into Maryland and Pennsylvania in July of 1863, both of those were attempts to elicit, right, to evoke the British and the French to finally do something and intervene. And the principal factor preventing them, or a principal factor, is the fact that the Russian government had told them, if you meddle, you will have a war in Europe. You will have a war on your hands in Europe. And that would have certainly been a world war. The United States and Russia against Britain, France, Spain, possibly Austria on that side. There's good indication that Prussia, right, Germany, would have gravitated to the U.S. and Russian sides because of the hostility between Bismarck and Napoleon III. Right, Napoleon III was always worried that if he sent his army to fight, in the United States, he did send an army to Mexico, but not the big one that he kept. If the French garrisons on the Rhine were empty, then Prussia would come across. And there's also the fact that German savers, right, just normal German people, bought United States government bonds to help finance the war effort. So that would have been World War I, 50 or 60 years earlier, with a much better overall outcome, because it would have ended imperialism and colonialism in the world instead of prolonging it, which was the effect of World War I. So anyway, if you want to talk about all of that stuff, right, there's great figures. Cassius Clay, the U.S. ambassador, this is a guy from Kentucky. He's the nephew of Henry Clay, the great compromiser. That's Lincoln's man in St. Petersburg. Mm-hmm. We've got William Seward, right? You've seen him in the Lincoln movie, I would expect. You've got Napoleon III. You've got these British oligarchs that I've said, Lord Palmerston, Lord John Russell, Henry Gladstone. You get a cameo appearance from Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband. And then you get Tsar Alexander II. And this is somebody quite formidable. This is the person who freed 23 million Russian serfs. He put an end to serfdom. And both Lincoln and Alexander II were killed. They were both assassinated by operations coming from British intelligence. In the case of Alexander II, it was anarchists, Russian anarchists run from London. And in the case of Lincoln, it was these Confederates run from London. So all of this. But the Russian fleet arrived in New York City September 24th, 1863. The Russian Pacific Squadron arrived in San Francisco on October 12th, 1863. And these fleets stayed in U.S. waters until the spring of the following year, the spring of 1864, when it became the conclusion that the foreign intervention crisis had pretty much passed, right, that it was not going to happen. Very interesting story, though, about San Francisco. At this time, the United States was too weak to have a two-ocean navy, so there was really only a one-ocean navy with a couple of other ships thrown in. So it was mainly the Atlantic. But you have San Francisco, of course. There's the Pacific. What are you going to do there? The question was that the defenses were maybe not that great in San Francisco. It was rumored at a certain point that Confederate raiders, right, the Alabama, the Sumter, some of the Shenandoah, were approaching to try to attack and burn San Francisco. And since the Russian admiral was there, he got his ships ready to defend San Francisco. Now, there's a moment from the anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of July. We then had the anniversary of the surrender of Vicksburg on July 4th. We've had the anniversary of the Battle of Fort Wagner, which was the first time that an entire black United States regiment went into action and acquitted themselves heroically, right? What you've seen in that movie, Glory, right, from some years back.
Yes.
But the big international question was that Britain and France were determined to destroy the Union. They were determined to attack Lincoln. And this was Lord John Russell and Lord Palmerston and William Gladstone in London and Napoleon III in Paris. Napoleon III was actually even more gung-ho than the British. The British realizing what the price to pay might have been. But the thing that deterred this overwhelmingly was the clear policy of the Russian Empire, of the Tsar, Alexander II. Alexander II made it clear that if Britain and France attacked the United States, came into the war on the side of the Confederates, Russia would attack both of them, England and France. And that could have taken the form of a Russian army in Paris. Remember, the Russians had been in Paris in 1815 at the end of Napoleon, right? The city was occupied by Russia, so they knew that was within the logistical capabilities, and it might have meant a Russian army going into India to take India away from the British. And there was very little the British could have done if the Russians had decided to send an army south into India. So that is the ball game. In other words, the entire Confederacy, in many ways, is a bet on getting the British and the French to intervene. Right? All the stuff about King Cotton,
right?
How if they're deprived of cotton,